Hello, this is Mark Ryer. For the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 11th issue of the New York Times, an Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Okay, let's start out with the first article. U.S. steps up campaign against Maduro in seizing tanker off Venezuela. The seizure comes as the United States builds up its forces in the Caribbean as part of a campaign against President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. The United States seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela on Wednesday, a dramatic escalation in President Trump's pressure campaign against Maduro, the leader of Venezuela. Speaking at the White House before an event on a new luxury visa program, Mr. Trump announced the operation and said it was a large tanker, very large, adding, without elaboration, that other things are happening. When asked about the ship's oil, Mr. Trump said, "Well, we keep it, I guess." He declined to say who owned the tanker. It was seized for a very good reason, he added. 3 U.S. officials who spoke on the condition of remaining anonymous described a law enforcement operation, said the ship was carrying Venezuelan oil. They said there was no resistance from the crew and no casualties. In a statement, Venezuela's government called the seizure a bare-faced robbery and an act of international piracy aimed at stripping the country of its oil wealth. The operation was the latest tactic in an expanding effort to squeeze Venezuela and pressure Mr. Maduro. The Trump administration has accused him of running a narco-terrorist cartel sending drugs to the United States, although many current and former officials in Washington say the campaign is ultimately aimed at regime change. Since September, the United States has launched more than 22 known strikes against boats in the region, killing more than 80 people. The Trump administration insists, without publicly providing evidence, that the boats are smuggling drugs. Legal experts say that the strikes may violate international law. Attorney General Pam Bondi posted a video on Wednesday evening on social media showing armed U.S. forces rappelling from a helicopter onto the deck of the tanker. The video could not be independently verified. Ms. Bondi said the operation included the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Coast Guard, supported by the Pentagon. She said the tanker had been used to transport sanctioned oil from Venezuela to Iran. The U.S. officials said they expected additional seizures in the coming weeks as part of the administration's effort to weaken Mr. Maduro's government by undermining its oil market. One of the officials identified the tanker as a vessel called the Skipper and said it was carrying Venezuelan oil from Venezuela, a state-owned company known as PDVSA. The official said the ship had been previously linked to the smuggling of Iranian oil, a global back market that the Justice Department has been investigating for years. The vessel was sailing under the flag of another Latin American nation in which it was not registered, the official said, and its ultimate destination was Asia. A federal judge issued a seizure warrant roughly 2 weeks ago because of the ship's past activities smuggling Iranian oil, not because of links to the Maduro government, the official said. Prosecutors have said that Iran uses money generated from oil sales to finance its military and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which the United States has designated a terrorist entity. The administration did not address many details about the operation, including what happened to the crew and what ultimately will happen to the ship. It was not clear whether the seizure warrant, which is sealed, was for the ship or the oil or both. The White House did not immediately respond when asked whether the United States had the legal authority to keep the oil. The ship, under a different name, had been put under sanctions by the Treasury Department in 2022. U.S. officials said it was part of an international oil smuggling network that facilitated oil trades and generated revenue to support Hezbollah and Iran's Revolutionary Guard Force. The tanker may have been trying to conceal its whereabouts by broadcasting falsified location data. Before the seizure, according to an analysis of satellite imagery and photographs by the New York Times, the Navy, the Coast Guard, Southern Command, and the Pentagon all declined to discuss the episode, referring questions to the White House. Venezuela is exceptionally dependent on oil, which makes these kinds of seizures potentially damaging to the country's fragile economy. Oil accounts for the bulk of the country's export revenues. In turn, Venezuela's government spends much of the proceeds from oil exports and import basic necessities like food and medicine. Although Venezuela is believed to have colossal untapped oil reserves, the country produces far less oil than it did at the start of the century, after mismanagement, U.S. sanctions, and corruption at PDVSA hobbled output. The United States was long the largest buyer of Venezuelan oil, but political tensions have eroded those ties. China now buys roughly 80% of Venezuela's overall oil exports. Smaller amounts of Venezuelan oil are exported to the United States, often to refineries on the Gulf Coast and to Cuba, where the island nation's communist leaders have long relied on such cargoes to provide a semblance of economic stability. In recent months, Mr. Trump has ordered a huge buildup of U.S. forces in the region, with more than 15,000 troops and a dozen ships in the Caribbean, including the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford. Mr. Trump has authorized covert action against Venezuela and has warned that the United States could very soon expand its attacks from boats off the Venezuelan coast to targets inside the country. But Mr. Trump has also recently spoken by phone with Mr. Maduro about a possible meeting. The president said on Wednesday that he had not spoken to Maduro since their last conversation. The administration has developed a range of options for military action in the country, including targeting Mr. Maduro and seizing control of the country's oil fields. The president has repeatedly expressed reservations about an operation to remove Mr. Maduro from power, aides say, in part because of a fear that the operation could fail. Mr. Trump has been in no rush to make a decision, though he has shown a particular interest in extracting some of the value of Venezuela's oil for the United States. The oil tanker operation came on the same day the Nobel Peace Prize was formally bestowed on a Venezuelan dissident, Maria Corina Machado. She was not at the ceremony on Wednesday in Oslo, where her daughter received the prize on her behalf, but the Nobel Peace Prize Committee said she had left Venezuela and was traveling to Oslo. Okay, moving on next in a related article. Nobel Peace Prize winner Machado vows to end Maduro's rule in Venezuela. Maria Corina Machado reappeared on the global stage as the Trump administration ramped up its pressure campaign against President Maduro. Maria Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize this week, vowed on Thursday to bring democracy to her country and end the government of President Maduro as she reemerged on the global stage after more than a year in hiding. Ms. Machado held a news conference in Oslo alongside Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre of Norway, as the Trump administration dramatically increased its pressure on Mr. Maduro. On Wednesday, the United States seized a Venezuelan oil tanker off the coast of the South American country. Ms. Machado has been a steadfast supporter of President Trump's pressure campaign against Maduro, whom the Trump administration has accused of flooding the United States with drugs and criminals. On Thursday, Ms. Machado dodged a reporter's question about her views on the threat of U.S. military action in Venezuela, but she repeated the Trump administration's talking points on Mr. Maduro's government, comparing him to a criminal mastermind engaged in a vast array of illegal activities in partnership with America's adversaries. Venezuela has already been invaded, she said. We have the Russian agents. We have the Iranian agents. We have terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, operating freely in accordance with the regime. We have the Colombian guerrilla, the drug cartels. Venezuela has economic and security ties with Iranian, Chinese, and Russian companies, and sells most of its oil to China. But there has been no conclusive evidence that Hezbollah and Hamas are present in Venezuela. Mr. Maduro's largest corporate partner is Chevron, the American energy company, which has continued to export Venezuelan oil to the United States despite Mr. Trump's military escalation. In response to questions about the seizure of the oil tanker, Ms. Machado said that she supported cutting the funds of Mr. Maduro's government. She added that he finances himself with gold smuggling, human trafficking, drugs, and illegal oil sales. Ms. Machado arrived in Oslo hours after her daughter, Anna Karina Sasso, accepted the award on her behalf. Ms. Machado held back tears as she described seeing her 3 children for the first time in more than a year. I couldn't sleep last night, going over and over again about the first instant when I saw my children, she said. For many weeks, I have been thinking of that possibility and which one of them I would hug first. All right, moving on. Next article. Always on my mind. Trump's enduring focus on Joe Biden. After nearly 11 months in office, the president's tendency to talk about his predecessor is more pronounced than ever. Of all the statistics that came out of President Trump's economic address on Tuesday night in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, surely one of the most striking was this. He mentioned Joe Biden 30 times. That would be 31 times if you count sleepy son of a bitch, which the audience surely did. Sleepy Joe Biden. Have you heard of him? Mr. Trump asked at one point. At various other points. So you have Biden food price increases. You know what you did during the Biden era for Thanksgiving? I had a news conference, unlike Biden. Stupid Joe, Sleepy Joe, Crooked Joe, Joe. Hardly a day goes by that Mr. Trump does not talk about his predecessor. Even still, his performance at Mount Pocono seemed to represent some kind of new summit being reached, according to a review of all his speeches throughout the year. Tuesday's was the one in which he mentioned Joe Biden the most. Mr. Trump has been in office for nearly 11 months, but his fixation with the guy who had the job before him has not diminished as time has gone on. It actually seems to be growing more intense. An analysis of his first 50 days in office, conducted back in March by the New York Times, found that Mr. Trump mentioned the name Biden 6.32 times a day on average. At a cabinet meeting last week, 316 days into his second term, he spoke about Mr. Biden 8 times during one 20-minute window. It's also notable that his fixation has become more acute as Mr. Trump has started facing scrutiny over some of the same issues for which he attacked Mr. Biden, namely his handling of the economy and his age. It's like a rhetorical Chinese finger trap. The more that Mr. Trump's troubles resemble Mr. Biden's troubles, the more Mr. Trump talks about Mr. Biden. He's like a bad gambler who just can't stop doubling down on the same bet. And that bet was the cost of living, and age was killing Biden, said James Carville, the veteran Democratic strategist. The president was in Pennsylvania because his political advisors fear he might be making the same mistake that Mr. Biden made. He insisted to voters that the economy was better than they realized, and that they weren't actually suffering as much as they felt they were. Mr. Trump pretty much did the same thing on Tuesday, but with plenty of Biden trashing thrown in. Mr. Trump's allies disputed the idea that he is a man obsessed, as well as any comparison between the presidents. The two economies are not the same, to say nothing of the two men, said Kellyanne Conway, a longtime Trump advisor who worked in his first administration. It is fair to remind everyone how bad things were just a year ago. Trump won, saying, "They broke it, I'll fix it." That takes time and persistence, both of which he is investing. Exactly no one is obsessed with Biden, she added. Mr. Trump, who is 79, has continued to savage Mr. Biden, who is 83, as infirm and out of it on a consistent basis. You think Biden could do that? Is a frequent refrain. But these attacks against Sleepy Joe could land differently now that it is Mr. Trump who has been filmed dozing off during his own cabinet meeting and in the Oval Office. The reality is just changing on him, Mr. Carville noted. He's been president for almost a year, and the more things go wrong, the more he wants to blame Biden, said David Axelrod, another veteran Democratic strategist. It's a leaky lifeboat at this point, but he still grabs on. Any questions having to do with Mr. Trump's own stamina lately have caused him to lash out furiously. Minutes after he wrapped up his speech on Tuesday, he posted a lengthy screed to social media that began with, "There has never been a president that has worked as hard as me." It ended with him accusing the Times of treasonous crimes for publishing an article about his health and his age. "I will know when I am slowing up," he noted, "but it's not now." And yet, the more that Mr. Trump trashes his predecessor, the harder it becomes not to see some similarities. The tight circle of aides who surround Mr. Trump are even starting to sound like the tight circle of aides who surrounded Mr. Biden. It's 7 p.m. on Saturday night, and President Trump is still in the Oval Office working. Stephen Cheng, a top White House aide, wrote online last week, "It's truly remarkable to witness," he said, "of seeing the president doing his job at that hour." Which sounded not so different from the sort of things Mr. Biden's White House aides used to post about their boss as they sought to refute questions about his engagement with his job. There's an old adage about the power game in Washington that if you stay here too long, you risk becoming the very thing that you came here to fight against in the first place. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, next article. Calabrese's run-in with Rubio wasn't its first controversy. The typeface, the target of the State Department's typographical about face has been entangled in politics before. It has been a key player in a corruption scandal and regularly engenders heated debates online and in professional circles. This week, it was in the crosshairs of the State Department. Yes, we're talking about Calibri. Yes, the typeface. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio reversed a Biden-era directive by ordering American diplomats around the world to stop using Calibri for official work and return to Times New Roman, the State Department's previously official typeface of nearly 20 years. When the department switched to Calibri from Times New Roman in 2023, officials said the move was intended to improve accessibility for readers with disabilities, such as low vision and dyslexia, and for people using assistive technologies like screen readers. Mr. Rubio cast this week's reversal as a part of a push to stamp out diversity efforts and as a return to tradition. He blamed radical Biden-era diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility programs for what he said was a misguided and ineffective typographical switch. Switching to Calibri achieved nothing except the degradation of the department's official correspondence, Mr. Rubio said in his directive. Calibri was invented for Microsoft in the early 2000s, one of 6 typefaces designed for ClearType, a new software technology that made text more shapely and easier to read on screens. Calibri's inventor, Lucas de Groot, a font designer in Berlin, has said that Microsoft asked him to submit a proposal for a sans serif typeface, one without the little wings and feet at the edge of many characters. Mr. de Groot started with some old sketches for a typeface he had previously designed with television broadcasting in mind. He drew letters with their corners and stems subtly rounded, he wrote. But thinking that the rounded corners would likely not look good for ClearType, he sent Microsoft 2 versions, one with the rounded corners and one without. I like the look of it, but as you see, these rounded tops look real ugly in ClearType. Don't choose this, he said he told Microsoft, referring to the rounded version. To his astonishment, that was the one Microsoft chose. In 2007, Microsoft made Calibri the default typeface for its suite of Office software. They gave it a large audience. Microsoft 365 has over 400 million users, the company said last year. Microsoft has described Calibri as a general workhorse of a typeface. It remained the default for 17 years, until Microsoft replaced it with Aptos, a slightly rounder typeface. The creator of Aptos was aiming for a typeface with the universal appeal of the late NPR newscaster Carl Kasell and the astute tone of The Late Show host Stephen Colbert, Microsoft wrote in a blog post about the change. The switch to Aptos prompted some complaints on social media, although some users said they'd like the new font. Calibri has also featured in a decades-long debate over whether serif typeface, like Times New Roman or sans serif, ones like Calibri are better. Research increasingly indicates that sans serif fonts are easier to read, though some researchers argue that the feet on serif typeface help guide readers and can reduce confusion. Mr. Rubio's typeface order this week cited the origins of serif typeface in Roman antiquity, saying that they are generally perceived to connote tradition, formality, and ceremony. According to the State Department's policies, other serif and sans serif typeface, including Arial, Verdana, Garamond, and Courier, are still allowed on its website. The State Department's typographical about face this week was a relatively minor Washington storyline, but in Pakistan, Calibri once played a key role in a case that brought down a prime minister. During a 2017 corruption inquiry into Nawaz Sharif, the prime minister at the time, and his daughter, Maryam Nawaz Sharif, who was seen as his political heir, investigators said that she produced a trust deed purported to be dated to 2006 that would have exculpated her. They said they determined the deed had been forged because it had been typed in Calibri, which is not commercially available to the public then. Mr. Sharif stepped down in 2017 after the Supreme Court ruled that the corruption allegations had disqualified him from office. As significant as the choice of typeface can be, it is perhaps not the most pressing problem in the world, said Gerald Beckfisher, a typologist of 40 years in Australia. When typeface becomes part of the political discourse, one should wonder if there are things we are distracted from that need more attention than picking a typeface, he said. Okay, next article. Lawsuit challenges Park Service passes featuring Trump. An environmental group is suing, saying federal law requires an image of public lands, not the president. An environmental group on Wednesday filed a lawsuit challenging the National Park Service's plan to emblemize President Trump's face on some annual passes to national parks starting January 1st. The suit, filed in federal court in the District of Columbia by the Center of Biological Diversity, argued that it would violate federal law to put Mr. Trump's visage on some of the passes, which have traditionally featured photos of scenic landscapes and wildlife. Representatives for the Park Service and its parent agency, the Interior Department, did not immediately respond to a request for comment. In a video posted on the Interior Department's website in recent weeks, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum said that a design featuring Mr. Trump and President George Washington would be one of several commemorative new designs for our park passes. Mr. Burgum said that starting January 1st, the design would appear on some America the Beautiful annual passes, which grant visitors year-long access to national parks and other public lands. He said that people who volunteer for the federal government could buy a volunteer pass featuring a photo of President Theodore Roosevelt, which members of the military and their dependents could buy a military pass featuring a photo of Mr. Trump saluting troops. But according to the lawsuit, the change would violate the 2004 Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act, which requires the passes to display the winner of an annual photo competition held by the National Park Foundation, a nonprofit that helps raise private funds for the Park Service. A photo of Glacier National Park in Montana won the contest for the passes to be sold in 2026. In announcing the winning photo, the National Park Foundation wrote that the image captured a breathtaking view of towering mountain peaks rising above alpine waters. Blotting out the majesty of America's national parks with a close-up of his own face is Trump's crassest, most ego-driven action yet. Kieran Suckling, the executive director of the Center for Biological Diversity, wrote in an email. In a single great image, it encapsulates what is so disturbing and bizarre about Trump's view of presidential power: the disregard of law, the squashing of public involvement, and especially the politicalization of even the most mundane of government actions, he added. Akshay Joshi, who snapped the winning photo of Glacier National Park, could not immediately be reached for comment. In an announcement last month, the Interior Department also said that starting January 1st, tourists from outside the United States would have to pay a $100 surcharge to visit the country's most popular national parks. That is 3 to 5 times the typical entry fee for U.S. residents. Supporters say the new fees could generate hundreds of millions of dollars that could be used to repair deteriorating roads and buildings at parks across the country. Critics say the charges could prompt international visitors on a tight budget to skip the nation's natural wonders, worsening what is already a decline in foreign tourism. In addition, the Interior Department said last month that it would cut Martin Luther King's birthday and Juneteenth, two holidays honoring Black history, from its list of free entrance days next year. Visitors will instead receive free entry on June 14th, which is both Flag Day and Mr. Trump's birthday. All right, next article. House gives bipartisan approval to $900 billion defense bill. The legislation codifies President Trump's agenda, but includes a few measures challenging his policies and insisting on more consultation with Congress. The House, on Wednesday, approved a $900 billion defense policy bill that would codify much of President Trump's national security agenda, but seek to curb his move to withdraw from Europe and to mandate more Pentagon consultation with Congress. The 312 to 112 vote on the legislation, which would provide a 3.8% raise to U.S. troops, reflected bipartisan support for what is commonly regarded as a must-pass bill. It goes next to the Senate, which is also expected to approve it overwhelmingly, sending it to Mr. Trump for his signature. The measure includes an array of provisions that place Mr. Trump's stamp on the U.S. military, including one that bans diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at the Defense Department. But to bring it up, House Republicans had to overcome resistance in their own ranks from hard-right members, some of whom said the measure would seek to block U.S. troops from withdrawing from Europe and would send new aid to Ukraine, abandoned the president's America First promises. The legislation also reflected growing frustration among members of both parties with the way Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has run the Pentagon, especially when it comes to the administration's boat strikes in international waters, which have killed at least 87 people since September. It would mandate that the Defense Department send Congress unedited videos that officials have so far been unwilling to show lawmakers of the maritime attacks, which Mr. Trump has said are being undertaken to target narco-terrorists trafficking drugs into the United States. And it would withhold 25% of Mr. Hegseth's travel budget if he failed to give the Congressional National Security Committees the video footage and the command orders behind the strikes. The price tag for the bill came in $800 billion above what the Trump administration had requested, reflecting continued support in Congress for pouring huge sums into the military. Leaders of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees said the bill would modernize and streamline the way the military buys weapons and supplies. White House officials argued in a statement that it would strengthen the defense industrial base while eliminating funding for wasteful and radical programs. But the legislation has also challenged parts of Mr. Trump's agenda. The bill would block the Pentagon from reducing the number of troops permanently stationed in a deployment, or deployed, to Europe below 76,000 for larger than 45 days, unless Mr. Hegseth and the top officer overseeing U.S. European Command certified to Congress that such a withdrawal aligns with U.S. national security interests and that NATO allies were consulted. And though Mr. Trump has pressed to end U.S. military support to Ukraine, the measure would authorize $400 million in annual security assistance for Kyiv for another 2 years. A handful of House Republicans, including Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, cited that provision in explaining their opposition to the bill. I would love to fund our military, but refuse to support foreign aid and foreign militaries and foreign wars, Ms. Greene wrote on social media. Limiting the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Europe is at odds with recent moves by the Pentagon, which recently said it would cut U.S. troops in Germany, Romania, and Poland, taking lawmakers by surprise. The provision also challenges the approach laid out in a new White House national security strategy that threatens to back European political parties cultivating resistance over long-standing U.S. allies and NATO countries. Representative Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, said in a speech on the House floor that voting for the bill was an act of reasserting Congress's authority as a co-equal branch of government, which is but one step along a very long road. The legislation, he added, was an effort to try to get some restraint on the lack of transparency, the unaccountability, and the problems that are coming out of this White House and this Department of Defense. Democrats had pushed to include a change to the Defense Department's health care plan to cover in vitro fertilization for troops and their family members. But for the second year in a row, Speaker Mike Johnson intervened during final negotiations to kill that provision. His opposition sprang from concerns that IVF would lead to the destruction of embryos, a central critique of the treatment by conservatives. The bill would also repeal Iraq and Persian Gulf War era authorizations for the use of military force that presidents of both parties have used to justify military operations overseas without the consent of Congress, something Democrats and Republicans have long called for. And it would roll back sweeping sanctions imposed on Syria's construction, energy, and financial sectors when former President Bashir al-Assad was in power. In the aftermath of the Assad regime and more than a decade of civil war in Syria, lawmakers in both parties have pressed to appeal the penalties to spur economic development there. The House originally passed a bill loaded with conservative social policy mandates, including a ban on the Pentagon covering gender-affirming surgeries for troops. But that provision and several others were stripped out of the final negotiations. The legislation still includes a ban on transgender women participating in women's athletic programs at U.S. military academies. Some aspects of the measure agreed upon during final talks were drawing harsh criticism on Wednesday, including one that originated in the House that would weaken safety measures around Ronald Reagan National Airport outside of Washington. The bill would create a waiver to allow military aircraft to turn off enhanced tracking software while flying on national security missions through parts of the Washington airspace, or if the military determines that the flight poses no risk to commercial planes. The legislation fails to make the skies safer, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, and the chairman of the Commerce Committee, and Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington, the panel's top Democrat, said in a joint statement. House Democrats also took issue with what they said was a last-minute addition to the bill that would expand the ability of federal agencies and potentially local law enforcement to monitor, intercept, and disable drones that could pose a threat. Representative Benny Thompson of Mississippi, the top Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee, said the provision lacked necessary guardrails and warned that it could lead to major civil liberties violations. All right, next article. Trump administration opens applications for $1 million visas. President Trump has framed the program as a way for the government to raise billions of dollars and prioritize the admission of successful entrepreneurs and investors. The Trump administration debuted a website on Wednesday that opens up applications for a gold card, an expedited visa that the federal government plans to provide to people who pay at least $1 million. To apply for the card, people have to pay a non-refundable $15,000 processing fee, according to the site. After applicants are vetted and approved by the Department of Homeland Security, they will then have to pay $1 million to receive U.S. residency in record time and become lawful permanent residents. A $1 million gift upon completion of the individual's vetting is evidence that the individual will substantially benefit the United States, the website said. An individual may also need to pay small additional fees to the U.S. Department of State, depending on his or her circumstances. The website also provided a depiction of the card, which features a portrait of President Trump against the backdrop of an American flag and his signature under the words Trump Gold Card. Businesses can also apply for a corporate gold card to sponsor their employees. Firms will owe a $15,000 processing fee and $2 million for each employee approved for the card, according to the site. Excuse me. The new program has been in the works for months after previewing the gold card earlier this year. Mr. Trump signed an executive order in September that officially created the program. He has framed it as a way for the government to raise billions of dollars and prioritize the admission of immigrants who would affirmatively benefit the nation, including successful entrepreneurs, investors, and businessmen and women. Some Democrats and immigrant advocates have denounced the program, saying it would unfairly prioritize the admission of wealthy individuals. Some have also questioned the legality of the president's creation of the program. The website also previewed the creation of a platinum card, which would allow foreign nationals to reside in the United States for up to 270 days each year without being subject to taxes on income earned abroad. Foreign nationals approved for the card would have to pay $5 million, in addition to the $15,000 processing fee. The administration has created a wait list for the Platinum Card program. There is no assurance that the Platinum Card contribution will remain at $5 million, so you should join the wait list now, the website said. Subject to availability, applicants who are approved for the Gold Card will obtain legal status as an EB1 or EB2 visa holder, according to the site. Once the application and fee are received, the process is expected to take weeks, but officials noted that a small number of countries may have wait times of up to a year or more based on visa availability. In the past few weeks, the Trump administration has made sweeping changes to the legal immigration system. Federal officials put a hold on immigration applications filed by nationals from the 19 countries subject to the president's travel ban, which are mostly in Africa and the Middle East. They have also paused decisions on asylum applications and promised to review the more than 50,000 asylum applications that were approved during the Biden administration. Those changes came after the shooting of 2 National Guard members in Washington last month, which left 1 dead. The 29-year-old Afghan who received asylum in April has been charged with the attack. He has pleaded not guilty. Trump administration officials have cited the shooting to justify the reform, saying they are necessary to increase the vetting of immigrants in the country. Okay, next article from the opinion section, an article by Michelle Goldberg. Republican women suddenly realize they're surrounded by misogynists. In 1892, Phyllis Schlafly, perhaps the most important anti-feminist in American history, debated the radical feminist law professor Catherine MacKinnon. Schlafly believed that sexism was a thing of the past. To her, if women had different roles in society than men, it was due to their distinct talents and inclinations. She herself, she said, had never experienced discrimination. MacKinnon pointed out that she, who'd written exclusively about defense policy, had wanted a position in Ronald Reagan's Pentagon. This started in 1982, not 1882. Any man with Schlafly's considerable accomplishments, MacKinnon argued, would have been given a job. Schlafly had to concede that her feminist foe had a point. An ambitious woman who is willing to absolve the right of misogyny can go far, but rarely can she achieve the same status as a man. That's especially true today in a Republican Party that's increasingly given itself over to the most retrograde forms of sexism. Recently, several Republican congresswomen have been complaining, on and off the record, that their party's leaders, especially Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, don't take them seriously. It started with Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a one-time mega icon who is resigning next month. They want women just to go along with whatever they're doing and basically to stand there, smile, and clap with approval, whereas they just have to have their good old boys club, she said in September. It turns out she's not alone in her frustration. Last week, the Times reported on Republican women in Congress who say that Johnson failed to listen to them or engage in direct conversations on major political and policy issues, which they seemed to attribute to his highly patriarchal evangelical Christianity. He recently said that women, unlike men, are unable to compartmentalize their thoughts. Feeling sidelined by Johnson, some Republican women are defying him. All but one of the House Republicans who bucked leadership to force a vote on releasing the Epstein files for women. Of the 8 Republicans who joined the Democrats in November to try to censure their fellow Republican, Corey Mills, who has been accused of threatening his ex with revenge porn, 6 were women. Recently, rumors have swirled that Nancy Mace, who is running for governor of South Carolina, could soon follow Greene in quitting the House before the end of her term. Mace has denied this, but her disgruntlement is no secret. On Monday, she wrote in the Times, "Women will never be taken seriously until leadership decides to take us seriously, and I'm no longer holding my breath." It's tempting to roll one's eyes at women who are shocked to discover sexism in a political party led by Donald Trump. But it's a sign of progress that these women are not responding as Schlafly did, demurely accepting their subordinate positions within conservatism. They may not all call themselves feminists, though at times Mace has, but they're internalizing basic feminist assumptions about their entitlement to equal treatment. What they fail to understand, however, is that those aren't assumptions their party shares. Much has been made about the rebirth of gutter anti-Semitism and racism within the conservative movement. There's been less public alarm about the resurgence of unapologetic misogyny. Last month, there was an uproar over the support that the Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, offered to Tucker Carlson after his softball interview with Nick Fuentes, the influential anti-Semite. We've seen far less backlash to Heritage's hiring of Scott Yenor, who believes that workplace discrimination against women should be legal. As head of its Kenneth Simon Center for American Studies. Among the sort of young men who revel in transgressive anti-Semitism, which is to say, among much of the conservative movement's rising generation, calls to repeal women's right to vote has become commonplace. Not long ago, most Republicans at least pretended to accept liberal premises about human equality, sometimes even gloating about one-upping Democrats on diversity. In 2008, Republicans tried to capitalize on the disappointment some women felt about Hillary Clinton's primary loss by putting Sarah Palin on their ticket. There was a moment in 2011 when Michelle Bachmann was a leading candidate in the Republican presidential primary race. For years, it was almost a truism that the first woman president would probably be a Republican. Some steely American versions of Margaret Thatcher in high heels and pearls. Republicans didn't want to raise up women as a group, but they valorized a certain kind of powerful woman, one who disdained feminism and proved through her success that the strong didn't need it. Today, however, Republicans are much less defensive about being the party of chest-beating patriarchy. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has purged women from the highest ranks of the military. Johnson has attributed school shootings to the amoral society wrought by radical feminism and the sexual revolution, and has said Americans should strive to live by 18th century values. Vice President J.D. Vance is famously contemptuous of women without children. And the lower levels of administration are littered with defiant chauvinists. Paul Ingrassia, whom Trump recently made Deputy General Counsel at the General Services Administration, is probably best known for a leaked email where he referred to his Nazi streak. But he also reportedly intervened during a federal investigation on behalf of the misogynist influencer Andrew Tate, who is his former client and has been accused of sex trafficking. After electronic devices belonging to Tate and his brother were seized at the border, and he called opposition to women's suffrage very based, a term of high praise on the right. There are still plenty of opportunities in the MAGA movement for women who embody Trump's preferred style of hyper-femininity, espouse traditional gender roles, or both. Indeed, the president's obsession with aesthetics can open doors for women who might otherwise never have careers in politics. Many Republicans, like having beautiful women around, and they appreciate being able to put a feminine face on their culture war crusades. But as some women in the party are realizing, there's a big difference between being useful and being respected. Okay, we have time for one more short article. Canada closes highways to Vancouver after flooding and landslides. The atmospheric river over the Pacific Northwest brought a deluge of British Columbia, forcing road closures and evacuations in Canada. Major highways to Vancouver were closed early Thursday amid flooding and landslides that Canadian authorities said could block more roads. Canada's Transport Ministry started closing roads between British Columbia's interior and lower mainland, which includes the greater Vancouver area, on Wednesday evening as the rain caused flooding and falling rocks, posing avalanche risks. People are asked to avoid travel unless necessary until the heavy rainfall passes and water levels subside, transportation officials said in a travel advisory, adding that there was no timeline for reopening and more roads could be closed with little or no notice. The closures east of Vancouver have blocked the main roadways that connect the city and the rest of Canada. The disruptions echoed those that the region experienced in 2021, when floods and landslides in British Columbia killed at least 5 people. Several closings between British Columbia and Washington State were still operating early Thursday. The atmospheric river that began drenching the Pacific Northwest this week has set off evacuations throughout the region, including in Washington State. Forecasters warned that the rain could cause some of the region's worst flooding in decades. Flood warnings were active across southwest British Columbia, where local officials declared a state of emergency and issued evacuation alerts in several communities, including an order to evacuate one in Fraser Valley, the region east of Vancouver. Forecasters said that 3.5 to 5 inches of rain was expected in the Fraser Valley region through Wednesday evening. About half of that had fallen by Wednesday afternoon. David Campbell, an official in British Columbia's River Forecast Center, said in the news conference. Vancouver avoided the heaviest rainfall, but was under a high stream flow advisory, an indication that river levels could rise rapidly, and minor flooding was possible in low-lying areas. The greater Vancouver area was expected to receive 1.5 to 2.5 inches of rain, forecasters said. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 11th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Your reader today has been Mark Ryer. Thank you so much for listening.